Lisbon is today the capital of Portugal and one of the most historic cities in Europe, known for its hills, its views over the Tagus River, and its long connection with the sea. But to understand Lisbon in the year 1500, we must imagine a city at the very center of a global transformation. At the dawn of the 16th century, Lisbon was not simply a European capital. It had become the main gateway between Europe and the newly explored oceans. Ships arrived from Africa, India, and the Atlantic islands, bringing goods, knowledge, and wealth that were reshaping the world. The city stood on the northern bank of the Tagus River, near where the river meets the Atlantic Ocean. This location had always been strategic. The deep, wide estuary created one of the safest natural harbors in Europe. For centuries, this geographic advantage attracted merchants, sailors, and settlers who recognized the importance of this port. But Lisbon's story began long before the great voyages of exploration. The earliest settlements in the region date back more than 3,000 years. Phoenician traders established small trading posts along this coastline around the first millennium BC. These seafaring merchants from the eastern Mediterranean recognized the value of the Tagus estuary as a place where ships could anchor safely while exchanging metals, salt, and other goods with local communities. Over time, this settlement developed into a modest port town that served as a bridge between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean trading networks. In the 2nd century BC, the Romans arrived and incorporated the region into their expanding empire. They renamed the city al-Ushbuna and invested heavily in its development. Roman engineers built roads, aqueducts, and public buildings, transforming the town into an organized urban center. Al-Ushbuna became known for its production of garum, a fermented fish sauce that was highly valued across the Roman world. Amphorae filled with this product were exported throughout the empire, connecting Lisbon's economy with markets as far away as Rome itself. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the region experienced several centuries of political change. Germanic groups such as the Visigoths took control of the Iberian Peninsula, and Lisbon continued to exist as a regional port. However, the most significant transformation came in the early 8th century when Muslim forces from North Africa conquered much of the peninsula. Under Islamic rule, the city was known as al-Ushbuna. During this period, Lisbon developed fortified walls, narrow streets, and a complex urban structure typical of medieval Islamic cities. Agriculture expanded in the surrounding countryside with improved irrigation systems, while trade continued to flow through the port. For several centuries, Lisbon remained part of the Islamic world, connected culturally and economically to cities across North Africa and the Mediterranean. The city's population was diverse, including Muslims, Christians, and Jews living side by side, contributing to commerce, crafts, and scholarship. In 1147, during the period known as the Reconquista, Christian forces led by King Afonso I of Portugal captured Lisbon with the help of Northern European crusaders who were passing through on their way to the Holy Land. This event marked a turning point in the city's history. Lisbon became firmly integrated into the emerging Kingdom of Portugal and soon began to grow in importance. By the 13th century, Lisbon had already become the political and economic center of the kingdom. In 1255, King Afonso III officially moved the Portuguese capital from Coimbra to Lisbon, recognizing the strategic importance of the city's port and its growing commercial influence. Throughout the late Middle Ages, Lisbon continued to expand. Its docks became increasingly busy with ships carrying salt, wine, olive oil, and agricultural products from across Portugal. Merchants from Italy, Flanders, and other parts of Europe visited the port regularly. The city was becoming more than just a regional hub. It was slowly turning into a maritime gateway connecting Europe to the wider world. Everything changed dramatically in the 15th century with the beginning of the Portuguese age of exploration. Under the patronage of Prince Henry the Navigator, Portuguese sailors began exploring the western coast of Africa. Their voyages pushed further south year after year, mapping unknown coastlines and establishing trading contacts. Lisbon became the operational center of these expeditions. Shipyards along the Tagus River built new types of vessels, including the famous caravels that were designed for long ocean voyages. Navigators, cartographers, and merchants gathered in the city, sharing knowledge that would reshape global geography. By the late 1400s, Lisbon was at the forefront of maritime innovation. Portuguese explorers had rounded the southern tip of Africa, opening a sea route to the Indian Ocean. In 1498, Vasco da Gama successfully reached India by sailing around the Cape of Good Hope. This achievement transformed Lisbon almost overnight. The city now stood at the center of a vast trading network that stretched from Europe to Asia. By the year 1500, Lisbon was one of the richest and most dynamic cities in the world. Ships returning from India carried spices such as pepper, cinnamon, and cloves, goods that were incredibly valuable in European markets. These cargoes passed through Lisbon before being redistributed across the continent. The wealth generated by this trade funded new buildings, churches, and infrastructure throughout the city, one of the most iconic symbols of Lisbon's importance. During this period was the construction of the Belém district along the riverfront. This area became the departure point for many of the great voyages of discovery. Sailors leaving for unknown oceans would pass through this part of the city before heading into the Atlantic. Not far from the docks stood the Jeronimos Monastery, whose construction began in 1501. Built in the elaborate Manuelan architectural style, the monastery celebrated Portugal's maritime achievements and honored the explorers who expanded the known world. Lisbon in 1500 was a city full of contrasts. Along the waterfront, bustling docks were filled with sailors, merchants, and dockworkers unloading cargo from distant lands. Exotic goods such as spices, silks, ivory, and precious stones arrived from Africa and Asia. At the same time, narrow medieval streets climbed the steep hills of the city, where ordinary residents lived in small houses overlooking the river. The population of Lisbon was growing rapidly. People from many different regions arrived in search of opportunity. African sailors, Italian merchants, Jewish traders, and Portuguese craftsmen all contributed to the city's vibrant economic life. The port was a meeting point of cultures, languages, and religions. Despite its wealth, Lisbon remained a medieval city in many ways. Most buildings were constructed from stone and wood, and the streets were narrow and crowded. Markets filled the squares where vendors sold fish, bread, wine, and imported goods. Churches and monasteries dominated the skyline, reflecting the deep influence of religion in everyday life. From the heights of the al-Ushbuna district, residents could look down toward the river and see forests of ship masts rising above the harbor. Each arriving vessel represented news from distant lands and the promise of new riches. Lisbon's influence extended far beyond the Iberian Peninsula. As the center of the Portuguese Empire, the city became the administrative and commercial heart of a global network that connected Europe with Africa, Asia, and eventually the Americas. Maps created in Lisbon helped Europeans understand the true scale of the planet, while navigational techniques developed by Portuguese sailors made long-distance ocean travel possible. By the early 16th century, Lisbon had become one of the most important cities on Earth. It was a place where global trade routes converged, where new ideas about geography and exploration were constantly emerging, and where the wealth of distant continents flowed into Europe. The city that once began as a small Phoenician trading post had transformed into the capital of a maritime empire. Standing on the banks of the Tagus River around the year 1500, a visitor would have witnessed a city alive with ambition and movement. Ships were constantly arriving and departing, carrying explorers toward unknown horizons. Lisbon had become a gateway to the oceans and a symbol of humanity's growing connection to the wider world.